It is a make or break moment for the government of Colombia's first leftist president. Gustavo Petro ran on a promise to end the civil war that has tormented the country since the 1960s. Now, a temporary ceasefire between the government and the last remaining major guerrilla group, the ELN, the National Liberation Army, has just come into effect. Similar truces have proven volatile in the past, but Colombians are daring to be cautiously optimistic. The ceasefire is part of a push for what the president calls total peace, the demobilization of all of Colombia's armed actors. That includes guerrillas, paramilitary groups, gangs, and drug mafias. The ceasefire is set to last 6 months with the possibility of being made permanent. Nearly 500,000 Colombians have been killed in fighting during 6 decades of conflict and millions displaced. In 2016, Colombia's government signed a peace deal with the leftist FARC group that has only been partially implemented. We want to take a closer look at the situation in Colombia. We can do that with Elizabeth Dickinson. She is a senior analyst for Colombia at the International Crisis Group. She's normally based in Bogota, Colombia, but joins us tonight from Denver, Colorado. Good to have you on the day. Welcome. Now, this ceasefire with the ELN guerrilla, how important is it for Colombia's quest for peace?
So this is a really significant advance, and I think it's a very good first step in trying to de-escalate the situation, particularly with the ELN, the largest remaining leftist movement in Colombia. Now, in terms of the broader conflict, essentially what's happened since 2016, where we did see this peace agreement with the former FARC guerrilla movement, is that Colombia's conflict has fractured. We have more actors today. They're often smaller and more locally based. But in that context, the ELN is very important because it remains the last political insurgency, and it has a very significant presence across Colombian territory. So 180 days is the longest ceasefire that's ever been agreed with the organization, which indicates the level of trust between the negotiating teams that we hope will open a space to push negotiations towards a full end of conflict much further.
Mm-hmm. In the 6 decades of armed conflict, almost every Colombian family has been affected by the violence. What about today? How present is the war in the lives and the minds of Colombians?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects of it. I think nationally speaking, we're in a moment when Colombians feel increasing insecurity. A lot of the indicators of conflict-related violence, like displacement, forced confinement, these things have started to go up in recent years, and particularly since the pandemic. So there is a sense of urgency to the situation to address the daily lives of many Colombians, particularly in rural areas. The other aspect of it is just to understand what daily life is like in areas controlled by the ELN. In these areas, the rebel organization really is the arbiter of daily life. They're adjudicating disputes. They're laying down penalties for robbery, for infidelity among couples, disputes between neighbors. They really are the authorities in these areas, and that's an authority that comes with often the use of violence. So I think disarticulating and really peeling apart these layers of violence that are clouding daily life in Colombian society is the priority for many of the voters, and particularly the voters who supported this government.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this government, because the man who wants to bring total peace to the country is currently caught up in a huge scandal. His son, who stands accused of money laundering, has testified that cartel money actually helped finance his father's presidential campaign. How could this hamper Petro's peace efforts?
I think fundamentally it's a really unwelcome distraction. In order to do something as important and sort of big scale as this administration had come into office suggesting, the idea of total peace, which had at its core really reducing the impact of conflict for civilians through negotiation, that required a lot of political capital. And I think scandals like the one that's embroiling the government now about illegal campaign financing unfortunately will erode the government's credibility on a number of levels. And one very clear example is in Congress, where we have a law sitting in Congress that would be fundamental to the government's ability to negotiate with criminal organizations, to sit down with them and talk about how you demobilize these forces. Without that law passing Congress, which now looks very unlikely, given the current scandal and the way that the political coalition is collapsing. So the question really is, how will this government move forward with its ambitious plans, given that its space and its capacity to maneuver politically is significantly reduced?
Yeah. Gustavo Petro, just to give our viewers some background here, ran on a platform of giving a voice to the voiceless, of empowering the disenfranchised. How are these revelations true or not? Because at this point, it's all accusations. How is this going down with his supporters?
We think more than anything, it's disappointment. As you had mentioned, Gustavo Petro is the first elected left-wing president really since the beginning of the worst part of the civil war. And that was a very significant political opening because it was the Colombian public finally accepting that the left should have a chance to vote through democratic politics, should have a chance to participate. And I think so fundamentally, this is a chance that those on the left, and particularly in rural areas who had supported the reform agenda, the increase in the rural economy, I think they feel like this is an opportunity that simply can't be lost. And so, let's see how the government moves forward. But I think concrete wins like the ceasefire are going to be very, very important, bringing direct benefits to the peace negotiations that are ongoing to demonstrate that these promises can be upheld despite the political situation.
Yeah. Knowing everything you told us now, we also know that ceasefires like the one that started last night have broken down in the past. What makes this one different? Is it really the trust that the two sides seem to have towards each other, or is there something else to it?
So I think that both sides have very strong incentives to make this ceasefire stick. The first one is the local elections that Colombia will hold in October. I think both from the government's perspective and from the ELN's perspective, it will be favorable if that vote goes forward without direct clashes between the two sides. More broadly, I think the government clearly wants a good result from this process, and the ceasefire is really the first concrete win with the ELN. But more importantly, the ELN itself, because the conflict in Colombia has fractured and fragmented, and there are more groups today, the largest threat to the ELN today is not the Colombian state. It's actually other criminal and armed groups. And so from their perspective, not having to worry about fighting the state provides them with the ability to focus on their true enemies, quote unquote, for territorial control, which are other armed groups. So I think from the ELN's perspective, this offers an important tactical advantage and, frankly, the space in which the two sides can sit down and start to discuss the hard issues at the core of this conflict.
Elizabeth Dickinson of the International Crisis Group, thank you so much for your input.
Thank you.